I learned more about psychology in the 5 hours after taking these mushrooms than in the preceding 15 years of studying and doing research in psychology. Golden teachers, liberty caps, blue meanies, some call them magic, but I'll call them mushroom. But it's a specific psychoactive compound that separates these and more than 200 other species of fungi from the rest. Psilocybin. Psilocybin-containing mushrooms have weaved their way throughout human history, showing up in the artwork and written records of ancient societies such as the Aztecs, Mayans, and Egyptians. But it wouldn't be until 1953 when American banker and mushroom enthusiast R. Gordon Wasson would happen across an indigenous tribe in Mexico using psychoactive mushrooms, experience them for himself, and bring back a sample for research. Upon his return, Wasson would place this sample in the hands of Albert Hofmann, an all-around real fucking cool dude. The Swiss chemist known for the discovery of LSD was able to isolate the psychoactive compound from the mushroom and the magic within, leading to the first pharmaceutical production of psilocybin for use in psychiatry. In 1957, Wasson would be featured in a Life magazine article which would reveal the magic mushrooms to Western society at large, eventually bringing a group of professors at Harvard University led by Timothy Leary to begin experimentation with the psychedelic, while unknowingly setting off a chain reaction that would begin the 60s counterculture and the first widespread use of psychedelics in modern Western society. Meanwhile, in 1970, a young man by the name of Terrence McKenna traveled with his younger brother Dennis and some friends to Colombia in search of the DMT-containing shamanic brew, ayahuasca. It was on this trip that the group would stumble across a large field of Psilocybe cubensis mushrooms, which became the main focus of their expedition. The experiments undertook at their time at La Chairweiner would be documented in the books The Invisible Landscape, Mind, Hallucinations and the I Ching, as well as the later published True Hallucination. In 1976, the brothers, using spore prints brought back from the Amazon, would develop a way of growing Psilocybe cubensis outside of its natural habitat, and would share the technique with those seeking the knowledge in the book Psilocybin Magic Mushrooms Grower's Guide, bringing the reality of growing magic mushrooms to every dorm room and commune that dared. Once the effects of psilocybin are experienced in a responsible setting, it's easy to see how it's been compared to the mystical experiences written about throughout history and religious texts. And while psilocybin was and continues to be controlled in the United States federally as a Schedule I drug with no medicinal purposes, those who disagree with this sentiment have continued the research into its therapeutic, medicinal, and ritualistic use with very positive results, slowly bringing the compound back into discussion as a treatment for a variety of mental health issues. And with new legislation decriminalizing psilocybin showing up throughout Western society, studies and clinical trials have once again begun to breach the ocean of legality, proving beyond a reasonable doubt how important a role psilocybin has played in the evolution of human consciousness. And with that, let's join the discussion. This is the Psychedelic State Podcast.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Psychedelic State Podcast, where we will be talking about all things psychedelic, past, present, and future, including our own experiences. My name is Brett, and I'm joined by my two friends, Ashley and Carson, and we will be your hosts
What up?
on this journey through hyperspace, or whatever you want to call it, or mushroom land, or all the good stuff. Today, we are going to be talking about psilocybin containing mushrooms, and psilocybin in general, I guess, because at this stage in the game, pure psilocybin is being made in a lab and is going to be the way forward as far as medical use goes. Beyond that, obviously, there's going to be plenty of recreational use, which will continue to happen as it has with us. My first experience was in high school. I think it was definitely a life-changing experience for me. We weren't weighing anything at the time. You just get a bag and everybody split it, and you trip balls, and it was beautiful.
Neanderthals.
Yes, I guess that's kind of naturally the way it happened in history too. I don't think that scales in the early days. But what was your first experiences with psilocybin mushrooms?
My first experience.
Mine was also
Carson, after you, my love.
mine was also in high school, and also not a weighed dose at all. I did it with a couple of friends. I remember standing on the edge of like a valley, and realizing that I knew how to teleport myself from one side of the valley to the other side. Like, I remember reading about the Buddha, and something about the Buddha like beaming himself in a beam of light from the center of his chest, like across time and space to another location. And I was like, I know how to do that. And right as I was about to fucking like teleport myself from one side of the valley to the other side, my friend, who was also tripping balls, like walked into a fucking tree branch that went up his nose and started gushing blood everywhere. And I lost the epiphany. I was like, you fucking asshole. Like, I was going to teleport myself, and now I'm cleaning up your blood everywhere.
That's a beautiful experience, man.
Yeah.
Little did you know that blood sacrifice is actually the way that you teleport. So you were almost there.
Yeah, I agree.
I was so fucking close.
He was helping. He was trying to be helpful.
When was the first time that you had an experience with mushrooms, Ashley?
The first time I had an experience with psilocybin was actually funny because we had kids in my middle school who had made angel trumpet tea and taken it and then tried to fight the cops, and they were all like thrown in the hospital. It was like a pretty bad thing. They almost died again. So psychedelics were like super scary at my particular middle school. So I remember the first time I took them, I was in high school, and I ended up having a blast. It was like I liken it to an episode of That 70s Show. I felt like I was like sitting in a basement smoking weed. We were giggling, having a grand old time. It was life-changing in the sense that like I didn't really know that a drug could make me feel that way, because at that time I experimented with pot, obviously, basic beginner stuff, and pills, which are like great, you know. I mean, the doctor gave them to me, so I was like, that's pretty cool. I had a botched circumcision, so you know they had to remove a little extra, so you know they gave me some perks, and I was like, this is great, but not as far mind expanding as my first mushroom trip. So basically just sat around like little delinquents and giggled, and I remember feeling like I was poisoned and trying to make myself throw up in the beginning, and I threw up a bunch of red stuff, and I thought it was blood, but I realized that it was ketchup because I had eaten the hot dog prior to it. So.
Well, that's usually how it goes, man. That's like the story with like beets. You know what I mean? You can get a real scare with that.
Beets will scare you. Beats by Dre.
Were mushrooms the first psychedelics you guys did?
I actually done acid before.
You did acid before. I did acid after.
I did acid before also. But I think like the main thing is that I find fascinating is like at the time, I don't think I realized the impact that it had on my consciousness or on the way that I saw the world. Like it seemed more like a quick temporary thing and then back to normal. But going later in life, I could definitely see the impact that it had on me. And it was probably way later in life when I started to see other generations that weren't as exposed to psychedelics as our generation was. And I'm 45, so I'm a 90s kid. And, you know, shit was everywhere at that time. But I feel like people who are maybe 15 years younger than me or so weren't as exposed to it. And, like, when I had my business and I had some younger kids working for me, I was like, you know, everybody here is, these guys are great, but there's just something different. And it was like, oh, they haven't fucking taken psychedelics. And I realized like that there is this like almost a switch that it feels like, at least to me, that happens the first time you have a pretty heavy psychedelic experience. What do you guys think on that?
Well, that's what I was going to actually say. I was going to say that like, I don't necessarily know if it's your first, but there is the time. I think it's actually when you break through the holy shit, I might die, holy shit, I'm dying, and then part of you does maybe die, and you're like, I think that honestly, my experience with psychedelics has been, I feel like the great parts that I've gotten out of psychedelics have been based in fear. It's like something you face, and it's you come out the other end knowing that you come out stronger because you face things, and it's not even necessarily something profound. It could be something like, holy shit, man, I don't think I'm gonna ever make it out of this forest. Oh, I'm in my friend's parents' room and there's just a lot of plants, like fucking little dumb bullshit like that. And it turns the mundane into things that are a lot more crazy. And I feel like, this is going to get a little sciencey, and I'm not going to try to be a nerd. I want to establish myself as the cool guy of the podcast, the real chiller guy. I don't want to get too sciencey, but like the psychedelics open a part of your brain that has evolved away, because if we spent time fucking looking at flowers and shit when we were, cavemen, we'd get eaten by a big old lion of some sort.
Right.
I know that I'm not sounding too smart right now, which I'm trying to do. I'm actually
I think that's a good point, though. And it's been scientifically proven now, like kind of what's happening. It is removing a lot of the filters that we have built in to our, experience of this reality, which filters a lot of stuff out in order for us to function in a certain way. And a lot of that is, if not all of it, is tied back to a survivalist mentality, keeping yourself alive in this world of peril where there were like fucking saber-toothed cats and shit. So now everybody's just scared of, like, I don't know what, but it's a lot of it is in a way unnecessary. I feel, at least, but we're getting beside.
I'm terrified constantly these days, just of everything, really. I think the world is just extremely scary, and honestly, now I feel like psychedelics make me feel less scared. I go into a very much nicer place. When I was a kid, I would take them and I'd be like, oh shit, this is way scary. I want to go eat spaghetti at my parents' house, but like now shit's already just so scary. I'm like, let's go, dude. Let's see how crazy this fucking clown.
And I think
let's fill this clown car up with as much crazy shit as possible and shoot me out of the world in a fucking cannon. Let's get it.
And that's totally where setting comes into play in a psychedelic trip in general. And with mushrooms, there's a markedly different experience you'll have when you take them amongst a group, maybe out in public, any of those things, versus like the way that I take them now, which is really like laying down in bed and putting headphones on and listening to fucking John Hopkins album, Music for Psychedelic Therapy, and like,
what up, John?
Weighing it out the proper, like the exact amount, and really focusing on a move inward instead of the experience of what this outer reality becomes in that state. Because in that difference, like, I've had some crazy experiences, like being out in like downtown, tripping balls, that were
just a nightmare.
But it's like when you are like in a controlled environment and say laying in bed with headphones on, eyes closed, or maybe a mask on or something, it's almost like you're not tripping at that point. It's like it just pulls you into this whole different experience, and it pulls you out of you and into this other experience. And that's kind of like I would say that's, and maybe there's a point, because when you're young, it's a different experience than when you're older. And obviously that's going to have a lot to do with your psychology and what you've been through and all that kind of shit up to that point. But I think there's also like a transition point where it goes, where you've had so many of these outer experiences that it's like that one time when you end up alone, or your friend's like puking his guts out over on the left-hand side, and you're sitting there by yourself and facing this experience with some fear, and getting over that part to where, like, the next time you have the experience, you might just, like, for me now, I'll like set up the whole house a certain way and do all this shit, and then as soon as it kicks in, I'm like,
baby proofing.
I didn't need to do any of that. Like, well, I love this. Why was I even, like, my mind can't remember the experience.
When you say you're wearing a mask, are you wearing like a Richard Nixon mask, or like the mask of the guy from Scream? Like, What do you do to make your?
It's a Guy Fawkes
What do you do to make
mask.
your?
Slipknot mask.
It's the one.
Is that because I look like I feel like I look like fucking Guy Fawkes right now?
You
I
do.
got the little thing and the thing, and my eyes are all like this.
the fantastic?
I'm Egyptian, by the way.
The fantastic Mr. Guy Fawkes. That was a movie about it.
I think, but to bring it back, I think like as you get older, like the intention changes when you eat psychedelics. Like I remember, like when I was younger, we just fucking eat mushrooms, like, and go to the fucking movies and shit, and you know that was like, you know, a completely different experience than say the last time I ate mushrooms, where I was wanting to have an experience where I was processing the end of a relationship and wanting to, you know, get really clear on what my future, what I wanted for myself in the future. You know, I did it alone, did it in my house, had a fucking bath, like wrote in my journal and
I
shit.
think what's
like,
interesting,
completely different than
totally, and I agree with you 100%. And that's also the difference for me. It's but it's like you almost have to. Most people will never get there. Like a lot of the people that I did psychedelics with when I was young won't do them now, even though they had the time of their life. So it's like you almost have to get to that point where you see the possibilities, at least with us, because it's like, you know, the generations that are coming up now are going to be coming up in this medicinal landscape of psychedelic use, where it's like, oh, it's used for therapy, it's used for healing, it's used for, you know, this and that, where it's not just, where for us, it was just like this crazy thing that you did because, it was like you just
because I'm so young, I've never grown up and got to the, you know, beautiful level that you guys are at. I still like to make it as scary as possible for myself. I set up like a little fucking, I set up haunted house lights and shit like that. I get my dog really riled up and then I just fucking eat as much as possible, you know?
Yeah.
I like to make it terrifying.
Terrence McKenna would call that a heroic dose, I believe. You know?
Well, no, it's so for people that don't know what set and setting is, you want the set to be as scary as possible.
Well, no,
and the setting to be as terrifying as uncomfortable as possible,
right? And
then you have a really good time.
That being in a relationship,
just joking.
So you should want to do it.
What a little disclaimer under me. It actually doesn't really mean that. He's just joking because he's the funny one.
I'm sure it'll say at the beginning of this podcast that, you know, we don't consider ourselves professionals. We're not giving advice.
I'm professional.
I'm a straight expert, though.
I was going to say, as far as taking drugs go.
Well, professional would
if you put that shit on a resume.
Professional would imply that you get paid to take psychedelics. So if we can monetize this podcast somehow, we will be professionals at psychedelics.
What's up?
Right now, I believe
what up, big
we're
pharma?
Probably experts. Might not be scientific experts, but whatever. All right. So anyways.
What up, lobbyists? Hit up your boy.
I would say, like, let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the world with psilocybin right now. And its legal status, because we are seeing some major shifts in, you know, I mean, there was probably, I mean, we can go back to, let's say the 50s. All right. So to give a brief history of psilocybin, well, I guess maybe it was, were they using psilocybin or LSD in the 50s? I think it was LSD probably. Psilocybin probably came about in the 60s when Timothy Leary went to Mexico and kind of had the experience with Maria Sabina, and
Marina Sabina. I like that rhyming.
But that was that even before that though. Like there was what is R. Gordon Wasson or whatever. He's the one who went to Osaka. I think that's how you say that, Mexico, and met Maria Sabina.
Osaka's
he was
Japan.
There. Oh, even before Oaxaca, whatever. My Spanish is shit. I'm from Canada. You guys know the Spanish shit, whatever. But even I think he's the one who told everybody about Maria Sabina even before Timothy Leary went there, right? So like, and that was in the 50s, but then Timothy Leary, I think, went in the early 60s.
Yeah, well, when I was talking about the 50s, I was thinking about like the actual first time that psychedelics were introduced in a like psychoanalytical setting, in a clinical setting, where it was like the guys in Canada, and then you had Aldous Huxley, who had moved over and lived in California at the time, and LSD had started to enter the treatment aspect of it, and the studies and the science behind it was starting to take place in the 50s. Then the 60s happened, Leary, Albert, Metzner, and all of them at Harvard started doing the experiments that are now documented if you want to read more about that. Read the Harvard Psychedelic Club book, which is really good. It also paints Andrew Weil as a narc, which is pretty funny. He's the one who read the book. But hey, shout out Andrew Weil. And no hate.
Stitches get stitches, baby.
No hate on him. But so we had this time where Leary comes back after, they had done LSD prior to that. He comes back with the idea with psilocybin. Everything breaks loose. We have the 60s, they get kicked out of Harvard. The 60s happen. We all know what happened in the 60s. It was kind of a free-for-all. Based on that, the government clamped down on every study happening and declared a war on drugs in the early 70s via the dickhead Richard Nixon. Speaking of Richard Nixon,
which is, he's a real big piece of shit. That's for sure. If there's one thing I think we can all agree on is that Richard Nixon is a big piece of shit. But another funny thing I was going to say, one of the biggest introductions to psychedelic into the mainstream was Time did an article on LSD, and when that article came out, it was about how great it was and how the potential of it. And then like less than 4 years later, they did another article on it, and they were like, yeah, it melts your brains, fucks up your chromosomes, and it was a total slam piece on it. And it was like, and I mean, that was leading into the beginning of the war on drugs, which I think we can all say that drugs is one.
Yes.
And
well, it really wasn't
drugs.
even a war on drugs. It was a war on race. It was a war on like people kind of rebelling against society and what it stood for, and that like 50s nuclear family kind of thing. It was a war on a lot of shit, but it was framed as the war on drugs as a way to isolate certain groups of people, which we don't have to go too into, but as a way to isolate groups of people so they could crack down on things that were happening that the government didn't want to happen. It was less about drugs, obviously, but
they needed a scapegoat.
Yeah.
Because they were importing tons and tons of cocaine. So, I mean, there wasn't really a war on drugs. It was a war on the people they didn't like.
Right. So in the meantime, we now have
for sure
from the 70s upward till, we can say through 2020. So that's, we're talking about close to 50 years of no scientific studies being allowed. Well, that stopped in the early 2000s with the DMT study that Rick Strassman did that opened the floodgates back up for everything. But in that whole time, psychedelics became demonized. And we're just now getting to this point where the science is coming back. I'm not sure exactly where we're talking about legality. So we're now at this point in history where for the second time in Western history, at least, we're starting, and, we can talk about the Sasha Shulgins and all the people who stayed underground and continued research, but as far as the legal status goes, we're finally starting to see this new wave of legality. Ashley and I actually just went to the Wonderland conference in Wynwood, Florida, and saw the most crazy shit I've ever thought I'd see. That being
we're still wearing our press passes. For all those who are listening, they're non-existent because we snuck in. What's up?
We do have some coverage of that we will be releasing on our YouTube channel.
That shit was so awesome. I didn't realize that you guys were sneaking into that conference, and the fact that you did that gives me a full-blown hard-on. I love that shit.
We didn't realize
so
we were
much.
sneaking in either. We thought that the security would be way better.
Yeah.
But the security guard was way cooler than we thought.
Yeah, it was an interesting time. But you will see, anybody who's listening to this, check out our YouTube channel, and you will see footage of Ashley and I at that conference, what actually it was like. And just seeing this giant, you could imagine these conferences that they have, which are like maybe a fashion conference or a fucking conference for computer parts or a conference for, I don't know, man.
Viagra.
Yeah. like whatever.
They probably have
And
those.
this was like full on a psychedelic conference where it was like all these huge corporations and smaller entities that were promoting their own things that they're bringing to the table in this new wave. And through that, what we're now seeing is this complete about face in the media. And like you said, Ashley, it was like 4 years splitting like this wonder piece on LSD to the demonization of it. We're seeing the reverse of that again. And all the media is pushing for this. They're great and this and that and the other. And it looks like it's going to come to fruition in a way where at least people with medical insurance are going to have access to therapy with psychedelics, which for me is...
We can do a whole podcast on healthcare in America, but let's not, because it's a fucking bummer.
But at the current time, and right now we're in November of 2022, we're just starting to see some interesting things happen. So Carson, you're in Canada, where things are moving along at least legality wise or decriminalization wise at a slightly faster pace than they are here. In America, we're seeing Oregon has decriminalized. I think Washington has decriminalized.
And Colorado, baby. Congratulations, Colorado. More clapping.
Yep. So
applause trap.
Yeah. Well, we legalized marijuana a while back. So like that was kind of like, I think, a stepping stone towards reevaluating.
And when you say legalized, do you mean like legalizing on a federal level? Like, yeah.
Yeah, you can buy weed anywhere in Canada at a dispensary. It's federally regulated, and So
when did you start to see?
I think that it's probably the same as Well, like for like I live in Vancouver, which is pretty much like the leading edge of that, because we have what's called the downtown east side in Vancouver, and there, if you like look it up on YouTube or anywhere, just Google the downtown east side, you will see like there's a section of Vancouver, which is like about a 5-minute drive from where I live, where the police have just let go. They don't stop anything, and people just sit on the sidewalks.
It's like Skid Row.
I think there's an area in Philadelphia. Or like I think I think it's called Kensington or something in Philadelphia, but like there's an area. It's like there's an area where they just don't enforce anything. There's safe injection sites where you can go like shoot up whatever, and like there's people there to help you with overdoses or whatever, needle exchanges. But these, like, you can just shoot heroin, smoke meth, like whatever the fuck, smoke crack, like,
but it's
sitting
not
on the
federally
street
legal.
And the cops
it's
are
just
right
they've
in.
turned their eye on.
Well, not federal. Those
Right.
aren't federally legal. Here in BC, recently we legalized all drugs. I think like meth, heroin, crack, cocaine. If you have 2.5 grams or less, it's legal here. Like they won't charge you with possession. But we also, I think it started in 2019. Like about 3 years ago, there was a motion through city council for them to start cracking down on the sale of magic mushrooms, and it was voted down by city council. And that sort of like opened the door for like semi-legal, pseudo-legal mushroom stores. And now there's like I think it was in 2020, there's a guy, his last name's Larson, I think, but he opened, it's called like the Shroomery or the Mushroom Dispensary or something like that. And you can go in there, you can buy mushrooms, like you can buy ounces of mushrooms in the store. They also sell like kratom, they sell peyote cactuses. You can get cocoa infused like teas, buy coca leaf. You can buy LSD microdoses, all kinds of research chemicals.
So that's like way ahead of the game of the U.S. because I don't think currently there's anything like that in the U.S. There is decriminalization in certain places, and you are allowed to, like in Colorado, you could have 100 pounds of mushrooms right now, and you don't get anything. Like it's legal.
Well, so the Colorado, they just passed like it's plant medicine, so. Psilocybin, psilocin, DMT, ibogaine, and mescaline Not peyote cactuses so far, but that's because peyote cactuses are endangered currently, and they are trying to.
Oh man,
they're trying to focus basically on using just the chemical itself.
Yeah, which is good, especially if it's like synthesized in a lab. Like
100%.
Synthesized mescaline is, you can synthesize that from other precursors. You don't need peyote cactus.
Yeah, the other one is
I
was just talking. There's another cactus. It's actually, this cactus is legal across the United States.
San Pedro.
What was it?
San Pedro.
Yeah, San Pedro cactus.
San Pedro.
Exactly.
Yeah. And but those ones, like a peyote button is like small. Like it's like a peyote cactus is really small, and it takes like fucking 20 years to grow a small one. But like a San Pedro cactus, they grow like feet every year. Yeah. But you have to eat a fucking much of it too in order. Like the mescaline concentration is significantly less in a San Pedro cactus versus a peyote button.
So it's interesting, because I can't really it seemed like all this came out of nowhere, but obviously it couldn't have. Like there has been an underground scene going on for a long time. There have been for me, I think when we're talking, when Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, the first series came on Vice on the YouTube channel, where he was just like a long-haired youngster, like OG going into the fucking, I don't even know, man. Like that was some crazy shit. And then that show developing into what it did on the Vice channel and all that, exposing so many people to a different side of these substances. And not always in a great light, but it was a honest light. And he was explaining the chemistry behind these things and the science behind these things. And then following that, you have Michael Pollan releasing a book that became a New York Times bestseller. And he took the torch for a little bit and kind of ran with it. And then he made the documentary on Netflix, which is based on his book. And you got that. And that's, but at the same time, like they're in the background, this stuff had to be going on for a while. Or, I mean, I guess, like the Wonderland Conference, for instance, this was the second one that happened. So they did one last year. I don't know how big it was compared to this one. This one was fucking huge, but
it was way better because we were at it.
Yeah. So as far as I'm concerned, it was the first because it was our first.
It was the best one.
And we had to,
well, I know, like up here in Canada, anyways, like it was in
also
2020, I think, when I think it was in 2020 when there was, I think it was 10 or 11 terminally ill cancer patients got an exemption to pursue psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy to help deal with, the fact that they're gonna die.
Yeah, palliative care.
So
okay, that is really
that was I think about 2 years ago.
And that's been happening in the U.S. also.
And then
like
I think a little bit after that, they granted, I know it was like 15 or 16 or something like that, healthcare professionals an exemption for them to possess psilocybin themselves to help other people in therapy. So like it's been slowly sort of being accepted on a federal and regulated level, and they're starting to grant exemptions to allow people to work with psilocybin. And I think there have been some other exemptions as well, like with other substances, but psilocybin definitely seems to be like at the forefront because I think it's just more recognized that there's benefit to it and not a lot of like danger. Like you don't, like with ibogaine, for example, people have died from ibogaine overdoses or like complications from taking ibogaine, even though you could take ibogaine and it will like cessate methadone withdrawals like immediately, like within a day, and I've been a methadone addict. Like I like trying to get off methadone is
it's even harder than trying to get off heroin.
Possible, like 1,000 times harder.
Insane.
It's so hard. But like, so like with psilocybin, like nobody dies of a psilocybin overdose. I remember like buying an ounce of mushrooms once and eating, like on the first day I ate an eighth, got super fucking high, Then the next day, I like ate an eighth, but didn't feel anything. And so I ate another eighth on top of it, had a quarter, got a little bit high. Then the next day I ate like a half an ounce of fucking mushrooms and barely felt it. Like you can't fucking overdose on fucking mushrooms. You can like take too many and have a bad trip and like,
you know, because you can't really, I mean, psychologically, I guess you can make an argument that it could become addictive if you're trying to escape from life through it. But getting back to like
one of the things I've always experienced with psychedelics, and one of the reasons why I think it's great, coming from another person who I was addicted to heroin, and I've used psychedelics in every step to kick those habits, and it's worked. It's been insanely great to look inside myself as far as heroin addiction, cocaine addiction, but psychedelics generally aren't something that you take and the next day you're like, I want to fucking do it again. If you trip balls on acid, the average person, not you, Carson, not you.
Ketamine, I would say, is a bit of an exception to that.
It's not a text.
Ketamine we'll talk about next episode. Yeah. Okay.
But getting back to like
that one, I definitely had some addiction problems with.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Definitely, like you know, it's pretty much like if we're looking back at history, what's been happening over time, I think, is groups like MAPS, and they're probably at the forefront of like the legislation kind of stuff, and they've been kind of leading the charge. For them, they've put MDMA at the forefront, which is very, very, very close to being used legally in psychedelic therapy if it's not already. They were in stage 3 clinical trials years ago, and psilocybin just entered stage 3 clinical trials within the last few months. And MDMA was actually the perfect gateway into this stuff because they were able to show scientifically that it treats non-treatable PTSD
specifically,
which is,
really,
you know, like I argue with this, like I want to believe that they figured that out and said, you know what, it's impossible that you can walk into a fucking like a government place, a meeting, and tell them that you have something that can help soldiers that came back from fucking war, and they can't vote against it. You know what I mean? Like, that's the most, like,
you'd be surprised.
They got the like cheat card there.
Certain Republicans, you know, they voted against bills to help people that were suffering from cancer from being exposed to stuff after 9/11 and stuff like that.
Sure.
Yeah, the government can try to fuck with people that they say that they pretend to.
Yeah, I agree.
And I wonder, the question that I wanted to pose just about the whole psychedelic thing too is, I feel like one of the things that we're skipping over as far as psychedelics being reintroduced into Western society and into popular culture and the mainstream media is the idea of microdosing, which became really, really popular in the tech community in Silicon Valley. And the people, the thought process behind that was, these dudes are taking little bits of acid or mushrooms or whatever, and they're becoming extremely productive at work. And the American culture values work and productivity and money so much that they're like, fuck, we'll do anything we can. I don't care if we said these drugs suck. If it can help us make a buck, then let's get it. And I hate to be like a piece of
Capitalism,
shit. Exactly. I hate to think like that. But as someone who has lived in America, you know, lived overseas as well, and I have this just such a negative idea of capitalism, and I think that in the psychedelic community there already is this growing rift of people who want to profiteer it and see it as a way to make money, and people who want to keep it as a sacred sort of plant medicine kind of thing, which we saw at the conference with that organization Chairweiner, which is an amazing organization that's taking basically helping to keep indigenous tribes across North America and South America and into Canada that they use these medicines, whether it be mushrooms, ayahuasca, peyote, and they're trying to make money to continue not just the treatment, but actually support these tribes as the world evolves away from, you know, that sort of antiquity or whatever.
I think, like in any capitalist society, if you want to create positive change, the best way to do it is to make it profitable. And I mean,
It's like SLC function. I fucking seen that movie.
We're looking at, like, I think a great example of this is recycling, because we've seen this cycle already happen where it's like, okay, let's recycle. Yeah, all right. Somebody figured out a way to make money off recycling, and recycling started, right? What we're seeing now is they're having trouble making money recycling, and they're ending recycling programs around where I'm at least. I know, like in Dania Beach, for instance, they've already ended their recycling program, picked up the things, and they're just not doing it anymore. And the reason for that is because it's not profitable anymore. They can't.
And recycling was made as a way to blame us as citizens for the growing destruction of the earth, when it's really these huge companies that aren't going to change shit.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
for sure,
every which way, big business is going to fuck us. But the thing is, with psychedelics, is the potential of them getting fucked a little bit worth the availability on a large scale to people who, one, can really use the treatment. America is fucking light years behind on mental health. The world is in general, but America particularly places such little value on mental health, and these drugs work.
Yeah,
they do. I can say they work not just from studies, from fucking personal. I think that there are so many destructive substances in the world that we allow to fly, and we have these beautiful, beautiful plants that help people for fucking thousands and thousands of years. And it's good no matter what sort of fucked up corporate bullshit goes through. It's nice that they'll be available to people that need them.
Right. And
well, like, look at alcohol or tobacco, and like those are legal and readily available, and look at the damage they cause.
Absolutely.
Like, on so many fucking levels. And then you're like, oh, but psilocybin, like, fuck that shit.
100%.
Like, that needs to be illegal.
Let's talk about, like, what are the things that, like psilocybin, since we're talking about that specifically, it looks like the main thing that it's being used to treat, at least in the trials, is treatment-resistant depression. So that's like where psilocybin comes into play for that kind of stuff. Now, getting back to what you guys were just saying, like, is it worth the interesting thing is, there are, from what I understand and from what I've researched, there are two major players in psilocybin right now. And one of them is kind of a very pharmaceutical business oriented. And one of them is actually treating it as open source. Like, they're releasing all of their information, all of their studies, all of the way that they're making the psilocybin, like pure liquid psilocybin. And they're also offering it for free to all clinical trials that are taking place and all this shit. So we're seeing these two schools, and it's really about who's going to win out. Like, it's kind of a Blu-ray versus fucking whatever the other thing was.
Laserdisc.
No, it wasn't either.
Laserdisc.
We don't even remember what the fuck it was called. That's what I'm talking about. So we have these
Sega Genesis.
We have these two players in here, and it's like one of them, because you see a lot of these pop-ups that are happening, and it seems like a lot of them have people behind them who have experienced the benefits of psychedelic use, psilocybin use, whatever, and they're wanting to bring this to the forefront. And some of these companies that I've read about specifically have, like the ones who are doing psychedelic therapy, some of them have nonprofits attached to them, which allow for people who don't have insurance to come in and be served. They're also training people in like low-income areas to be able to facilitate this to other people in these areas. And so there is this, like, there's some heart behind it. And that's what I'm hoping kind of plays its way out in all of this. The other side of it is kind of the idea that who gives a fuck if psilocybin gets out again? We're going to see a drastic change in human consciousness like we did in the 60s. It'll be much bigger than the 60s, because the 60s was kind of centered in a few different places, really. And with this time, with the internet behind it, once it gets unleashed, I guess well, yeah, it was 60s, and then we saw it in the 90s, and now we're in the 2020s. So it almost like in my
30-year
hypothesis is the 30-year cycle, and where it's like when enough people take it, we reach this like, what do you call it? Like this, the tipping point where consciousness as a whole kind of pushes forward, where there's enough people that have now had these experiences that it, because reality is really what we make it as a collective humanity. So it's, once enough people have had these experiences, like what happens when the CEO of some shitty fucking giant corporation does fucking
Walmart or
psychedelic
something like
therapy? What happens then? Like, what?
Hopefully they take the wrong mushrooms and die. No, I'm just joking.
So we could start to see like some sort of change in the way that all this shit, like where people actually start to grow, and their past traumas get resolved, and we start to see like these people who are because that's really what it is. The people like in power, who want all this money, who want all this stuff, are like hurt children inside, who have some trauma that they need to fucking deal with.
You can just say Elon Musk. It's fine. He's not going to listen anyway.
I will say Elon Musk, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, fuck that
he's
guy
a fucking
too.
Prime example. So what happens, and you would think that he's a guy who would have done psychedelics, but who knows? I don't think so. So I think a lot of people in those positions are going to be scared to do it. They fear the psychedelic experience, specifically because of, number one, because of all the shit that's gone on in the media in the past. But they're also going to see, like you guys were talking about with the fucking Silicon Valley guys, like, oh, holy shit, like Steve Jobs was taking psychedelics, and fucking all these dudes in fucking Silicon Valley are taking psychedelics. And, and they're the guys who are at the forefront of this new...
I mean, it is good to mention that the experience is so drastically different for a lot of people depending on your headspace. I mean, like, in my opinion, it's hard for me to see somebody take psychedelics in a strong way and get out of that and be like, fuck, let's go make some fucking money, man.
Right.
But it blows my mind.
Well, that's
it blows that, like...
So I think...
Does that actually happen though? Like, I think when you, like your example, Brett, when you're talking about like, like one company being like, oh, we're going to make a bunch of money on psychedelics, and then another company that's like, let's give this shit away for
make
free.
Money, but they're doing it in a more open way. Yeah.
But I mean, like
with some heart in it.
But I think like the second company, the one that has some heart, it's probably because the people at the forefront of that company, the people driving the culture there, have fucking used it.
I agree.
As opposed to like the other company, the first company being like, this is an opportunity to make some fucking
they're doing the old,
it's no different.
Yeah, these fucking
druggies. I can't wait for them to take it. And if you guys are listening, I'm going like this with my hand, like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons.
Yeah, that's exactly. So that's really the question. Like Mr. Burns, if Mr. Burns was able to, to heal his past traumas, because my experience personally is in healing past traumas, the first thing you do is you stop kind of focusing on yourself and start looking outward, and you start to realize where you can help, and you start to become kinder to people, and you start to become a little bit more open with people.
You start to see yourself in other people. So like you realize like when you fuck other people, you're fucking yourself too. It's
We're
like,
all one.
Yeah, I think that, so if you get to a place where like somebody in a position of power does psychedelics in a therapeutic setting and is able to deal with their traumas and come out the other side over the course of time. I'm not saying this happens in one session. I think it could, but I think if somebody really wants to do this and continues over the course of time with it and heals their traumas through this, or heals their depression, or heals the root cause of their depression, then that's when we'll start to see like this big... I think Silicon Valley at the beginning kind of had that in mind, and they went off track. You know what I mean? If you think
also
about...
look at it like... I always thought about it because I play music in the way, like, creating technology is their music. Creating their technology is their fucking magnum opus, their greatest album or whatever. And they're using these drugs, and they're stoked on it because that's what they love. They love to create, they love to invent, and they love innovation. Yeah. So using these drugs, doing it, I don't think that when I brought that up, I think that the people using the drugs in Silicon Valley were stoked that it was helping.
Yeah,
they were happy, and they were doing it from a place of happiness and a place of loving what they do. And that's the thing about the thing I'm complaining about society is people that are passionate about art or whatever, art in any form, you can call it, invention as a form of art. It gets co-opted and monetized.
Yeah,
which, just as you were saying, like with the two companies that are gearing up to monetize psilocybin, fuck yeah, dude, you should make money off of doing something great. Yeah. Like, you shouldn't only make money for doing shitty things. For helping people fix their minds and heal their inner traumas, that's a fucking amazing thing, dude. Yeah. I would pay money for that, for other people to do it. I think that, like you were saying, Carson, helping other people helps you. Like, you fucking build people up, and I'm gonna say some like kind of redneck shit, but this is a story that I heard, and I always thought it was a kind of a good idiom. There was a guy, he was a corn farmer, and he had the best corn, and he would enter all these competitions, and his neighbors competed against him, and he would give them his seeds, and he would teach them how to grow corn, and people would be like, why you're competing against these people? Why would you give them your secrets and help them out? And he was like, the better stuff that grows around me, the better my corn is gonna be. The better, like, if you water your neighbor's plants, your plants are gonna grow better too. If you build the people up around you, you're building a better society. And I think that's the beauty of psychedelics, is that, like, every time, no matter how bad of a trip I've had, I've come back to a feeling of interconnectedness with other people. And in a world that's so, especially post-COVID, like, when we were all literally removed from each other,
associated,
like, it's nice
isolated,
to feel connected to other people in the world. And I feel like one of the things that I enjoyed during the time where I was having lots of Zoom meetings or FaceTiming my friends, or like hanging out in a yard fucking far away from each other, was that I still knew that there was this root of connectivity. And I think that it exists in us, and I feel like we can get there. And even if these big fucking pharma dudes are that like these guys that are want it in it for the money, they're gonna fuck themselves over in the end, because the more you give this shit to people, the more people are gonna realize that we're here for each other and we can help each other, and it'll backfire. So hopefully, and fuck
and I don't give a fuck who's making money off it personally. You know what I mean? Like, it's I just want it to get out. I know that there's better ways to do it than others. I know that, I think it should be completely legal, and everybody should be able to go fucking buy mushrooms or pick mushrooms and take them at their house or whatever the fuck they want to do with them. I think it should be like that. But, it however it happens, as long as it happens, I think that's going to be a benefit to society as a whole. So, I think, like, so getting into the idea, I'd like you guys to each tell a story. Let's start with you, Carson, of, like, let's talk about the most beneficial trip you've had with mushrooms, what it did for you, and how how psilocybin can benefit society. I think through our own stories, we can kind of paint a picture of the possibilities. So do you have one in mind that like really was a shift for you?
Yeah, well, I did sort of mention it. It was like my last trip where I had just ended a 3.5 year long relationship, and I have been dealing with complex PTSD for the last 3 years. Well, I've had it for most of my life, but I was diagnosed with complex PTSD in 2020 and had been trying to, sort my shit out and stop, like, change a bunch of personal patterns that I was unable to sort of break away from, especially with regards to relationships. And so after ending this last relationship, I ate some mushrooms with the intention of, one, letting go of that relationship, and two, figuring out what I wanted for myself moving forward. And I think that was probably one of the most beneficial mushroom trips I've ever had, because I was able to get really fucking clear and in touch with like the core part of myself that wants the best for me, you know, and really just go inwards and just like inquire into, you know, what do I want for my life, you know? And I wrote it down, and I fucking sat there in the bathtub and I fucking journaled it, and I would just sit in sort of like a tripped out meditative sort of state and just be like, okay, like what do I want? And like, you know, the first thing I wrote down was like, I want to love myself. And like, that's something that I've struggled with my whole life. I've never loved myself. I've always kind of had a history of self-loathing, you know, and I'm super stuck on like my faults and my failures, and like can never really cut myself any fucking slack. And in this trip, I realized, you know, stuff like that's an important thing to me. Like, I want to get to a place where I love myself. I want, you know, and I wrote down an entire list of like what I want in my life. I want to be a kind person. I want to create good shit. I want intimacy. I want to feel like I'm part of a community. You know, these are the things, and they were like core values that I'd never really spent the time inquiring into, you know, like it's really easy to just float through your own life and not be really clear on what you want and where you want to go. And so this wasn't necessarily goal setting, but it was definitely like, what do I want for myself? And I wrote it all out, and I like taped it to my fucking kitchen cupboard. So I look at it every day when I'm fucking cooking food, and I like remind myself, this is what I want in my life. And that has drastically changed the trajectory of my life.
That was fucking beautiful, man.
Do you think that like there's...
wait, one second. I was going to make a joke about waterproof paper when you were talking about it in the bathtub, but it was so fucking beautiful that I waited to do it right now, you know? And waterproof paper, man, maybe we should get into that business. So. Speaking of capitalism.
Let's shout out waterproof paper. We have the...
Don't shout it out yet, dude. We got to get it.
Shout out to us for our patent on water patent. All right. So Carson, would you say that there was like a... because I guess... like there's obviously a difference between a state on psilocybin and a state where you would just sit down and do that. Do you feel like you were allowed more space without having to deal with emotion in a way maybe, or things coming up? Like, what's the difference between sitting down and thinking about this stuff in a normal state and sitting down and thinking about this stuff in a psilocybin assisted state, we'll call it?
The difference for me was like I was deeply connected to my like heart in the mushroom state. I think even with a long background of like I've been meditating every day, or you know, had a personal meditation practice for over 15 years now. I still, if I just sat down in a sober state to write that shit out, there's so much head talk, so much spinning, like so much thinking, so much analyzing. And in the mushroom state, I was just so connected to my own heart and like the core self, you know?
I mean, imagine the amount of people in the world who never will have that thought if they don't get exposed to something like that. Well, that's the thing. It's so easy to get caught up in your day-to-day life and never, ever to go through or give your brain enough time to even come up with things like that. And it slows your world around you down enough to notice things like that. And it's beautiful. Like it's an amazing thing that you can accomplish through the use of these substances.
Well, tell us, do you have a story that you'd like to share, Ashley?
My story is actually, what if I said I don't? That'd be so, I was like all cryptic about it. I was like, I don't want to talk about it, Brett. No.
I know a lot about psychedelics, but I've never taken them.
Yeah, no, I lock people up in my torture room and then I give it to them. I've seen other people writhe around in pain on it. No, I don't have a torture room. I mean, I don't have enough money to make a torture room yet, but it would be a sexual thing. It would just, it's not. It wouldn't be a murder room, and it would be consensual.
That Mike stuff.
And honestly, it would probably be me getting it because I mean, let's just go for it. You know,
boy.
Life's about.
Let's just be real.
I've been a fucking bad boy, and I deserve it. But my story is actually about a relationship I had as well. It was a relationship with heroin, and when I got clean, I was living in Gainesville at the time, and I would go back and forth to Jacksonville. I had friends up there, and I have a lot of family up there. So I went and visited. I went with my best friend Chris Ament, and we visited some of our old friends and had like for lack of a better term, like a dude's weekend, and we had mushrooms. And I was honestly at that point a little bit scared to take them because I was in a really weird spot. I had just gotten clean. I was still going through withdrawals. And I was kind of terrified, but everyone was like, you know, it was one of those macho fucking, come on, bro, you got this shit. And I did take them. And what happened was once I got past a little bit of anxiety and fear, I had like an amazing time hanging out with people that I really, really, really loved. And it reminded me of what my life was like before I had begun using opiates, and it was life-changing. It helped me because I know, as you probably know too, Carson, like when you're in the throes of opiate addiction, it's hard to think of your life outside of that small little prison, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, a cycle.
Exactly, and it's terrifying. I used to wake up every day and look at myself in the mirror and be like, I fucking hope you die today. Like, I do not want to be on the, didn't want to be on the fucking planet anymore, man. I was bummed at points that I wasn't dying and my friends were. And I got to see some childhood friends that I love take some fucking mushrooms. We like drove around in my friend's Jeep and we were like on these little dirt roads and spinning around and more redneck shit, you know? And
don't drive on psychedelics, man.
Well, yeah, the driver wasn't on psychedelics, so
all right.
He wasn't on that much psychedelics. Wink, wink.
Hey, I don't know how it
But I
works.
remember
I've seen people drive on psychedelics, and
it's not recommended.
I'm just saying it.
But if you have to go to the store,
if you have a choice, definitely drive on psychedelics because it's fucking super
absolutely
fun, and it's like you're in a
video
video game.
Dude. And you can drive as fast as possible.
That the one out of your friends that's pretty sure he knows how to do it, because that definitely
exactly. There's always one person in the friend group, and you got to pick them, and it's going to be the person who's most confident they can do it.
Exactly.
You know?
All right, so continue your story.
So we're doing that, and this is great. Like, this is just great because it reminded me of like when I was fucking 12, 13. Skateboarding, running from the cops. Like, we're in this little lot that was waiting to get developed because it's capitalist America, and the dude's doing donuts and all the skirts kicked up, and we get on the road and we immediately pull out of this little lot, get on the road, and there's a fucking cop behind us, and we're like, and it was such a fun, beautiful experience, and all of a sudden that adrenaline kicks in and you're like, motherfucker, we're tripping balls. There's a cop behind us, and the dude did not do anything. He drove right by us, looked at the car, looked at us, and like gave us this kind of nod, like probably one of those like good old boy cops up in Jacksonville. He kind of wants to he wishes that he was doing that shit still. Sold his soul and he got fucked, and then was like, and after that it felt like just so serendipitous the entire night. And I woke up the next day and I really felt like the majority of the withdrawals had gone. I was in like probably day 4 or 5, and generally it's like a 10-day to 2-week kind of ordeal.
Yeah,
methadone being like a lot longer, but this was just
way longer.
But and I felt really none of the negative effects of the withdrawal anymore. My brain felt amazing. I was extremely happy. I was like giddy, like a fucking kid, and it was beautiful. Like and I had a lot of experiences on psychedelics that have left me feeling that way, and I feel like no matter what happens with the bigwigs at the top making money and shit, if anyone who didn't have the access before gains the access through what's going on, the world's going to be a better place because of it.
Yeah, I think so too, man. And that's an interesting, difference between your guys' two stories. You know what I mean? One being like an example of a sitting down with yourself and going inside, and the other being a successful example of being in a group of people and still getting the benefits, from that experience, and having, it's like this stuff just kind of works in a way wherever it kind of sees fit. You know what I mean?
It's magic, man.
That's what they call really magic mushrooms. I'm telling you. And like and that's why I'm not going back to that. Anyways, I'll tell my story. I'll stop telling everybody to drive on mushrooms.
Don't drive on mushrooms. Drive fast.
Unless it's go-karts. All right. So for me, I think my biggest life-changing experience was probably about, I guess, a year and a half ago now, when I was probably about 3 months out of it was probably shorter than that, 2 months out of a relationship, and I had parted ways with my job at that time, and I was kind of in this limbo kind of state. How long ago was that? I don't know. That's probably a year and a half.
That was February of 2021.
Yeah.
So about a year and a half,
2 years ago.
Yeah.
So
because that was right when we started hanging out.
Yeah.
Weekly.
When we reconnected. All right. So I was in this like place of kind of I didn't know what I was gonna do, So it's kind of like you were talking about, Carson. I wanted to get some clarity on where to go with my life. I was at like a reset point in my life. I was single again. I didn't have a job, and I needed to figure out what I was gonna do. So with that intention, I kind of took a nice healthy dose of mushrooms, and what I realized in that state. And I took a lot that night. I kept like eating them. I was just rolling with this, like
hungry.
Yeah, it was such a beautiful experience that showed me that the only thing holding me back from doing anything that I want is fear. And that fear was that was it. It was like, you can do whatever you want. You just have to trust that it's going to happen and not get scared. So for instance, like I wanted to start a new business, but during the course of starting this new business, I would get to these points where I would run out of money and I would say, fuck, maybe I need to get a part-time job to cover this while I'm doing this or whatever, and blah, blah, blah. But because of that mushroom trip, I didn't allow that to happen. And I just said, fuck that. I'm just going to see what happens. And every time, like, at least in my experience, every time that happened, money showed up somewhere. Like the one time I had a bill due the next day and I was like, well, here's the first time I'm not going to be able to pay one of my bills. And somebody called me and offered me $200 to do a design job. The first time I wasn't going to be able to pay my rent. And I was like, well, I guess because I had made a deal with myself in that state that I would do whatever it took. If I had to move to a studio apartment, whatever I had to do, I was just going to do it. Like I wasn't going to have any fear of any of that shit. So, I wasn't going to be able to pay my rent. I was pretty convinced that I was going to have to move, and I accepted it, and I just continued on. And within like a week before I had to pay my rent, a friend called me who had just broken up with his girlfriend and asked me if I had a room for rent, and walked right over and gave me the money that I needed to pay the rent that month. And since like being able to do that, my life has changed 100%. And I feel like I no longer live with fear as a hurdle to anything that I try to do. And it's really liberated me to do so much more than I ever thought I could do. I guess maybe I thought I could do it, but there'd always be that little thing holding me back saying, well, you might run out of money, or you might not be able to pull this off, and by taking
the fear of failure is brutal,
totally.
Dude.
It's the little Richard Nixon in the back of your head
right
going,
up.
you can't do this. Little Richard Nixon, little
Fuck
dickhead.
that shit.
So for me, it was literally like fear got removed from my life through this experience. And so many doors have opened for me since then. So many things have happened in my life that have been positives. And I continue to live this way.
Yeah.
And I can 100% blame it on psychedelics. Like if I didn't take that mushroom trip, I'd probably be a upstanding member of society who wants money and like is scared to fucking not have it and all that shit.
He'd be getting all of his tattoos removed and shit. It'd be brutal.
Yeah,
man.
So it's like,
Now we're getting more, dude. Face tats and shit.
Yeah, we're talking about like a complete
Mushroom.
shift.
You got mushroom
Yeah,
like right
exactly.
on
We're
my
talking about
forehead.
I'm gonna get DMT under my eye.
We're talking about a complete shift in the way that I'm experiencing my day-to-day life, which has allowed for just so many good things to happen in my life. And it was 100% because of that mushroom trip.
Including this podcast.
Yeah. Because it's kind of, that's the point where, I guess it was a little bit before that where I really started diving in again. But yeah, this podcast and us coming together is, at least on my side of it, a direct result of that trip. All of these things playing out, me having more time, me doing these things. So, it's amazing to hear 3 different stories that are completely life-changing for 3 different people that are life-changing in different ways and, all due to fucking taking mushrooms. Like, what the fuck, right? Who would have thunk?
Yeah.
So I think, we can kind of wrap it up with that unless anybody has a funny anecdote. I kind of do that I could end with. One time I was tripping on mushrooms and I was with 2 friends and one of my friends was barfing on a tree and the other one was laying on his back inside the house. And I was like in the middle of this, like, oh, fuck. And I was really fucked up. And the guy inside called me in and I went up to him and I said, what's up, man? And he said, I think I shit my pants, man. And I got really scared and I ran out of the house. And my friend caught up to me. My friend who was throwing up caught up to me and he was like, what the fuck happened? What the fuck happened? And I was like, hey, he shit himself. And he was like, oh, fuck. And then the next day, we were dicks and we left that guy there. It was his house though, so it was cool. And then he came up to me the next day and he was just like, hey, yo, man, I just wanted to, about last night. He pulled me to the side. I was like, yeah, what's up, man? Like, sorry we left, whatever. He's like, no, it's cool, man. I just farted. And that was one of the funniest things I've ever heard in my life. And I still, to this day, do not know if it was true, but I can see how that's.
He definitely shit himself, dude. He totally shit himself.
Yeah, for
no
sure.
No one who just farted would even feel the need to bring it back up again.
Yeah, man. So it's like, but anyways, all right, we'll call it a wrap on this one. If you're with us this far, still hanging with us, we appreciate it. We are going to be continuing with this series, and we should have a few out, and they'll be coming out consistently. We're also going to have a YouTube channel, so search for Psychedelic State on YouTube, and you'll see some of our live action fun that we're having right now. And I guess, if you have any questions or comments, you can email us at psychedelicstatepodcast@gmail.com, and we'll answer your questions on air or read your comments, whatever you have to say. We'd love to hear from you and what you think. Big shout out. If you want to hear more about this kind of stuff, my recommendation would be do a search for Terrence McKenna on YouTube and strap yourself in for 1,000 hours of the greatest shit you're ever going to hear in your life about fucking mushrooms and psychedelics in general.
No, I'm doing the OnlyFans. I call it the fucking OnlyFans,
Right.
dude. You guys get the Patreon. My shit is gonna be psychedelic feet pics. It's called Trippy Football 69. Look me up, and I'll be taking mushrooms and mashing weird stuff around with my size 14 clompers. Those are my feet.
And with that, we thank you for joining us on this episode of Psychedelic State, and we'll see you next time. Peace out.
Peace.
Safe travels.
Later.